All right, guys, one more video for this week. This last one is on Chapter 10, and the topic that is discussed in Chapter 10 is test preparation and test performance. There's a lot of good stuff in this chapter. It's actually one of my favorite things to talk about because test anxiety, or the feeling of being anxious or scared or nervous about a test, it's a very real experience for a lot of us. And sometimes it comes up when we don't expect it. And some of us feel it differently for different subjects and different types of tests and things like that. So I'll tell you a little story. My favorite test anxiety story. When I was in, I guess I was trying to get into graduate school. So there's this standardized test that you have to take in order to go to graduate school to get your master's degree. It's called the Graduate Records Exam. And I studied for this exam for several weeks, which is very normal. People study for it for a long time. And I had this huge stack of flashcards, and I'd gotten this a study book, like one of the books that you would buy at the bookstore for the exam. So I got a GRE study book, and I'm studying about the test, and I'm practicing all these different math questions, and it's very similar to the SAT. It's just it's more difficult. The vocabulary is a little bit harder. The math problems are more advanced, not all that much more advanced, but it's like a higher level. It's to say, hey, I've worked my way through 4 years of a college education. I can demonstrate competency on this exam, and that allows me to get into graduate school. So, studying for this test, huge stack of flashcards. I took those flashcards with me literally everywhere. I sat in my car and flipped through flashcards at red lights. I took those to the bathroom with me. I would leave them on the counter when I got in the shower, thinking, okay, these are the 3 words that I'm going to learn while I'm in the shower today, and say them over and over and over. I had them in the kitchen while I was cooking. I went for walks around the neighborhood reading my flashcards. So constantly I had these cards with me. When I was at work, I used to work in this private school, and kids would come to me, and in between the kids, I worked with special needs kids, so I would be waiting for the kids to like switch out, and I would sit in my little at my little table with my stack of flashcards. I would go through my flashcards at lunchtime. I was all about these flashcards because the vocabulary was the hardest part for me. I can read, I can write. Those vocabulary words that are the words that you hardly ever use are the ones that rocked my world. So I lived and breathed these flashcards, and I studied and studied for this test. The morning of the test, I go to the testing center, and I'm ready. I had my flashcards because I was going to do some last minute studying, and I'm sitting down, and there's one person there before me, and this was at a Sylvan Learning Center, where you go in and they took us back one at a time to set us up on the computer for our test. They had to download the test, and there's all these codes and stuff. So the lady who's there with me went back first. She was taking the LSAT, the test to get into law school. And they take her back there, and I'm waiting for them to come back and get me. And like 5 minutes goes by, and then 10 minutes, and then 20 minutes, and I'm starting to freak out because my test was supposed to start at a specific time. So 45 minutes after the time that my test was supposed to start, and now I've been there for an hour and a half because you're supposed to get there before your test time, I'm a nervous wreck. I'm so nervous that my stomach is churning. I'm a sweater. When I get anxious, like the palms are sweaty, the upper body is sweaty. It's gross. It's totally not cool. But I'm sweaty. I'm freaking out. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to run out of time for this test. It was a mess. I was completely a ball of nerves. So when they finally came back to get me, the person working there said, I'm so sorry, we had trouble getting this lady's LSAT loaded. We're going to adjust things so you get enough time and everything's going to be okay. So I'm like, I'm fine, whatever, it's cool. I'm about 23, I guess I was 23 years old at this point, maybe 22, so I was still pretty young. So I walk back, I sit down at the computer, they set up my test for me, and the first several screens is entering all this information. My name, my address, stuff like that. I set all this stuff up, and then they run you through, it's like 3 sample questions, and they tell you, these are sample questions, we'd like you to answer these so that we can make sure that your test is working correctly. So I answer the sample questions, I get into the first real question of the test, I read it on the computer screen, I click the button to select my answer, and my entire screen shuts off. It goes completely black. The computer stops making noise, you know, the sound of the fan on the computer, the noise that kind of tells you that it's on. The sound goes away, the screen's completely black. I'm clicking the mouse, I'm pressing on the keyboard, nothing's happening. It's just dead. So at this point, I'm completely spastic. I'm trying not to cry because that's what happens when I get really stressed out. I've got my big giant headphones on because everybody in the room had big giant headphones on. And I end up having to take my headphones off and walk out of the room and go get someone that works there. And I explained to them what happened, and literally the conversation was, this just happened. I need you to please fix this. And then I went to the bathroom because I just needed a few minutes to calm myself down. And my body, I get stress response, and everybody gets stress response in their own way. So like I shared with you, I sweat, I get really, really anxious, my heart rate goes up, and I have to go to the bathroom. So that's my deal. I'll lay it right out here on the line. So that happened that day, and I was a complete ball of nerves. Anyway, by the time I got back into the room, they had the test all set up. Somehow my information saved, so I didn't have to re-enter my name and everything. I needed to score a minimum of 1,000 points on that test, and I kid you not, I scored 1,010. And I was so happy because all these little delays happened, and it was very stressful. It was extremely stressful, and this happens when students take tests in college classrooms. This happens when we take standardized tests, and I'm not saying it happens to everyone. You know, you're sitting there watching this video, and you know if this happens to you. So the question is, in this chapter, what can we do to either prevent this from happening or lessen the effects of it if it does happen? Basically, how can we keep our head together if we're in a situation where we're experiencing a high level of test anxiety? So the first step, and this is, any teacher is going to tell you this, the number one thing you can do to prevent test anxiety is to prepare for your test. How do you prepare for your test? Then we look at all the behaviors that we've talked about in the class and that you've seen in your textbook. You go to class, you take notes, you ask questions, you get to know your instructor, you do your homework, you take your quizzes, you basically be a diligent student. That's the number one thing to prepare for tests. The second thing is, probably pretty obvious too, is that maybe we don't wait until the last minute to start studying. Maybe, just if we can fit it into our schedule. Procrastination is definitely the brotherly companion of test anxiety. When we put things off, we can be setting ourselves up so that our anxiety increases. Hopefully we can avoid that by preparation and planning and maybe studying a little bit every night for a week instead of trying to study 5 hours the night before a test and making ourselves insane. It's totally understandable that not every time in your life is going to be perfectly planned out like this. And sometimes, yes, you're going to map out a schedule where you tell yourself, I have to study for an hour every night for this math test because this is the hardest math class I've ever taken, and if I want to pass this test, I have to do this. And then you know what? On night 2, you come home and your roommate's broken her arm, and you have to take her to the hospital because that's the way the cookie crumbled. And sometimes life is just like that. And when those things happen, the textbook outlines some strategies for you to deal with in kind of crisis mode. And they're kind of some cramming techniques, and you'll see them in your book. It's things like, don't try to read all the material, try to skim over the highlights. If it's a math test, then maybe we're trying to practice 1 or 2 of each type of problem instead of trying to practice 10 of each type of problem, or focus on the types of problems that you have the hardest time with and kind of just skim over or review the ones that you know really well, things like that. So those strategies are in your book. Some other things that you can think about in the heat of a moment, and there's really kind of 3 phases to a test. There's before your test, there's during your test, and there's after your test. So before your test is when we do all of our preparation and studying and things like that. The other thing you want to do is make sure that you kind of have all your stuff together the night before a test so that you're not scrambling in the morning. Put your keys by the door or by your backpack. Have your pencils and your calculator and all that stuff ready to go the night before. Know what you're going to eat for breakfast, and if you have to stop somewhere for breakfast, then make sure you get up early enough so that you're not parking halfway across campus and running across campus to get to class on time, which can also lead to more anxiety. And especially now, getting all hot and sweaty and then getting to class to take a test late, that could be a big kind of a downer. So that before the test, and then during the test, when you're anxious in the classroom, things that you can do are focus on your breathing, visualize the different parts of your body and practice relaxing them one at a time. That one can be really effective. If you're noticing that you're kind of clenching something, I had a student come to my office yesterday to ask for advice about choosing a major, and he was really anxious about this conversation because it was a really big deal to him. But I noticed that he's sitting in the chair and he had his hand on his leg and he's squeezing it, like his knuckles were turning white. And I looked at him and I was like, listen, let go of your leg. Like, let's just take a deep breath and relax here, because there's nobody in this office who's out to get you. So sometimes we clench up our bodies because we're thinking about something or we're kind of freaked out about something. And if you just focus on it and relax, you can notice that, oh, I don't have to be sitting like with a crick in my neck. I can actually kind of relax and breathe through what I'm feeling. So breathing is a big one. Relaxing your body, especially the pieces that you notice that are clenched up, is a big one. Sometimes it can pay to get to the test right on time, or maybe 2 minutes early, as opposed to showing up 20 minutes early and standing outside and the classroom and running the risk of someone else being really stressed out and that getting you stressed out. I would recommend that if you go to a class for the first test and there's someone outside the class 15 minutes before or whatever, and you're noticing that they're kind of nervous and you feel it rubbing off on you, just walk down the hall and take a breath and walk back, and just try to be in a place where you don't let other people affect you on test day. Another time to consider is after your test, and I am big into rewards, especially if it's been a really hard test or something you had to study for a lot. I think that it's a perfectly fine thing to tell yourself, oh, I'm going to go out to lunch at my favorite restaurant today, or I'm going to read a chapter tonight in a book that I've been dying to read and haven't been able to catch up on, or watch an hour of garbage television or something to just kind of take a break from all the work that you've just done. All right, I think that is enough. This is almost a 13-minute video, so I will stop now. There's lots of good information in your textbook. Good luck on your quizzes, and I will see you guys next week. Thanks. Bye.